Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We will begin our webinar in just about a minute as we allow for our audience to join and get settled before we begin with today's event. If you need any assistance, you can let me know in the Q&A panel. You can post your questions and any technical assistance you need there. Again, hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items I would like to mention. The slides and recording from today's webinar will be made available and sent to all participants. You may enable or disable closed captioning on the Zoom toolbar with the option labeled CC. If you experience technical difficulties, please notify me, Shane Hamstra, in the Q&A section. Questions can be submitted into the Q&A at any time, and we will address those questions upon completion of the presentation. With that said, I will now hand things over to Sarah Schumann to get us started.
Great. Thank you so much, Shane. And thank you everyone for joining us today for the National Alzheimer's and Dementia Resource Center webinar, Frontotemporal Degeneration, a focus on interdisciplinary care and caregiver lived experience. The National Alzheimer's and Dementia Resource Center webinar series is supported by the Administration for Community Living. And before we get started, Chris Stockton of the Administration for Community Living will give us a brief welcome. Chris?
Good afternoon, everybody, and good morning to anybody that's out there in Hawaii and Guam. I'd like to thank you for taking time out of your busy days to attend this important webinar, and especially, I know it's early for some of you to get your day started, so thank you for taking the time to do this. And I would like to thank Katie and Marilyn for being able to present on this important topic and share your knowledge and experiences with us. Sarah, if you'd like to take it from there.
Sure, thank you so much. So as you heard, today's presenters are Katie Brandt and Marilyn DiCarlo. Katie Brandt is the Director of Caregiver Support Services and Public Relations for the Massachusetts General Hospital Frontotemporal Disorders Unit, where she provides leadership for research, education, and community events aimed at supporting the caregiver experience for families impacted by Alzheimer's disease, frontotemporal disorders, and young-onset dementia. Her passion for this role was inspired by her experience as an FTD family caregiver for her late husband and for her dad, a veteran who has been living with Alzheimer's disease for 16 years. We also have with us Marilyn DiCarlo, who is a full-time caregiver to her spouse of 44 years, who's diagnosed with progressive supranuclear palsy, a form of frontotemporal degeneration. She has served on the All FTD Participant and Family Engagement Board for the past 4 years and is particularly interested in advocating for caregiver research and support. She lives in Boulder, Colorado. So at this time, I will turn the presentation over to Katie Brandt to begin. And thank you so much to both of you.
My goodness. Well, thank you so much for that warm welcome, Sari, and welcome to everyone. Thank you for coming to our webinar today, Frontotemporal Degeneration, a focus on interdisciplinary care and caregiver lived experience. I'm thrilled to be here with my colleague, friend, and fellow advocate, Marilyn DiCarlo. And we have our disclosure slides. Can pass by. Beautiful. So for the overview today, what we're hoping is that you'll take away 3 main points from this webinar. We hope that you'll understand a little bit more about the lived experience for families who are impacted by frontotemporal disorders and young onset and atypical dementias. We hope that you'll think about caring for the FTD caregiver, and that when you diagnose someone with FTD or a related dementia, you're actually giving out 2 diagnoses. We hope that you'll learn about specialized care needs and the benefits of an interdisciplinary approach to FTD care. Next slide. Great. And as Sari said, I'm so proud to be the Director of Caregiver Support Services and Public Relations at the Massachusetts General Hospital's FTD unit. And through this role, I have the privilege of working as a clinician, supporting families from the time of diagnosis through every stage of life lived alongside dementia. I'm proud to be an advocate for Alzheimer's and related dementias, and I served as co-chair on the National Alzheimer's Project Act Advisory Council for Alzheimer's Research, Care, and Services. And I've been able to work with incredible community members and raise over $2 million to support the research and clinical care efforts in the MGH FTD unit. And while this job is so central to the work that I do, my passion came from a personal experience. Here is a picture of my husband Mike and I on our wedding day. And, I love thinking about the first date that we went on when he picked me up at my dorm and he had a backpack with a half full bottle of wine, some big red party cups, and a picnic blanket. And we went out to look at the stars on the soccer field. And we talked for hours. And even though that night was heavy with the promise of romance, I had to tell my roommates that Mike was too shy to even hold my hand on the walk back to the dorms. Next slide. So we got married shortly after college, and we were thrilled to support each other through graduate school, working and saving and buying our first home. And then right after our fifth wedding anniversary, we found out that our love was too big for just two people, and our son Noah was on the way. And, this last picture of Noah with this little doggy hat, that's just a shameless, gorgeous baby photo that I love to include in all of my presentations. But it was really around this time that I started noticing changes in my sweet, kind, thoughtful husband. So, what were those changes? What were the early signs and symptoms that let me know something was going on with Mike? So, what we often hear about is that changes in behavior and personality can lead to difficulties in daily functioning, relationships, and communication. Mike showed a real lack of executive functioning. Just wear your tie was a statement that I said to him because he was required to wear a tie as part of the dress code for his job as a theology teacher at a local Catholic high school. And he wouldn't wear his tie, and he got a verbal warning and a written warning. He was at risk of being suspended from his job because he wouldn't wear the tie. And when I said to him, "What is going on with you?" He said, "Well, I just don't feel like wearing it." And it was maddening to me. I started getting phone calls from Mike's friends saying, "Hey, is Mike mad at me?" Because Mike was such a social person. He had a wide and happy circle of friends who loved to spend time with him. And Mike was more and more socially withdrawn. He wasn't interested in talking on the phone with friends. He didn't want to meet up to hang out. He was spending so much more time alone, which was very unlike him. Mike developed some perseverative behaviors, and his were actually focused on the Harry Potter audiobooks. For those of you who love Harry Potter, of course, it's so much fun to listen to. But in fact, that's 117 hours of audiobook. Mike would start at the beginning, listen all the way through the seventh book, and he didn't want to be interrupted while listening to them. He was so focused on these audiobooks that I had to say to him when I was in active labor with our son, "Take those earbuds out of your ear. I'm having our baby." The challenge of rice and avocado. Mike was a brilliant scholar, and he could read and translate texts from Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. And one day we were making a grocery list for taco night, and I found that he couldn't spell the words rice or avocado. Next slide. So I started taking him to the doctor. Mike saw two primary care physicians, three counselors, two psychiatrists, and one neurologist in a span of 6 months. Oh, there we go. He stayed overnight at the hospital and spent a week in a secure psychiatric unit. I still remember when I was at the very first appointment with the primary care physician. It was Mike's annual well checkup, and I just happened to go. I had Noah in the baby bucket on my arm, and I looked at the doctor and I said, "My husband is acting so weird. Could he have a brain tumor?" And she was the first of those 8 medical and mental health professionals to misdiagnose him. Next slide. It wasn't until I brought Mike to see an expert, the chief of cognitive neurology at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in Boston at the time, where he received the accurate diagnosis of behavioral variant frontotemporal degeneration at the age of 29. Now, FTD, which you'll hear it's referred to as frontotemporal degeneration or frontotemporal dementia. FTD is a progressive neurological disorder that affects the frontal and anterior temporal lobes of the brain. And oftentimes, the earliest symptoms are not memory related, but they are things that are part of our frontal and temporal lobes, often personality, behavior, and communication. And so I'd like to turn it over now to Marilyn to
Thank
share
you.
a little bit of her experience.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you everyone for joining us today. As a caregiver to my husband of 44 years, I have been on a journey for the past 5 or 6 years in really understanding not only how to be a caregiver, but really what is FTD and what can we do about it? We are a multilingual and a multicultural family. Here are some photos of my husband David, our 3 children, our 3 grandchildren, some recent photos. And you can see that family is really at the center of our lives. But David himself was born in Israel, was raised in France, spoke 5 languages, traveled the world as a salesperson for over 30 years. And all that while, he would come back to Boulder and we would just focus on each other and family. And that was the happy piece of our lives. And the reason that I show these pictures is because it still is. And that's one thing that I have learned on this journey. Next slide, please. But like Katie, the journey to really uncover what was happening probably about 10 years ago now, this all started, though it's really hard to know and hard to say that that was the actual start of it. We had some friends telling us things like, you know, why has David become a little bit more withdrawn? As a salesperson, he was always very outgoing and he was easily flowing from one person to another and one language to another as he journeyed, around the world in his role. And friends would say he doesn't talk as much as he used to. Hard for us because, our interaction was still pretty much bilingual and, still happening at home, but out in the world, it was changing. Friends also noticed that he had some involuntary movements, especially in his face, which we weren't really aware of. And that was kind of an interesting time. I remember at our daughter's wedding in 2017, a friend came up and said, "What's wrong with David's mouth?" And I hadn't noticed anything up until that time. And then in 2019, he had a pretty serious fall and fractured his leg in 3 different places. He was out walking the dog and it was an icy day and I thought he just slipped on the ice. But then he came to me about 3 months later and said he himself was noticing he was having some trouble communicating. Next slide, please. So we began the journey to try to identify what the problem might be. And first he went to his primary care physician who said, "All right, well, we'll send you for an MRI." He had the MRI and was referred to a neurologist. And then he was referred to a different neurologist at the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus. And after many, many tests with neuropsychologist, David received a diagnosis of early onset Alzheimer's. Okay, we thought, all right, we know what it is. But then David began to experience severe aphasia, where he was losing his language. And for a person who spoke 5 languages, it was just so disturbing. At that point, he received a diagnosis of PPA, primary progressive aphasia, another FTD. And we said, all right, well, we can deal with that. A year later, he had another serious fall, and the neurologist asked him to have a lumbar puncture. And we discovered it was negative for Alzheimer's. He was referred to a movement disorder specialist who then diagnosed him with PSP. That was a rather frightening moment. Next slide, please. So progressive supranuclear palsy, an FTD kind of similar to I can't think of the other one that is similar to the one. Anyway, is a movement disorder. Like it's a Parkinsonian type FTD, and it affects the midbrain. It affects the speech area, and it affects the frontal temporal area. So his issues around executive functioning, language, and movement all kind of now started to make sense once we got this diagnosis. Next slide, please. So FTD, and Katie will explain a little bit more about this from a more scientific perspective, but from my understanding, FTD is a related dementia to Alzheimer's disease. But the thing about FTD is that it's a full 20 years, usually onset is a full 20 years earlier than Alzheimer's. It can start like 30s, 40s, but usually around early 50s is common. But it is the most prevalent young onset dementia diagnosed under the age of 65. And there are 60,000 Americans living with FTD. I'll turn it back over to Katie.
Marilyn, thank you. And I think you really emphasized that just the journey to have that early, accurate diagnosis, right? Just like Mike and I, was so difficult. And you may have noticed that the name of the clinic that I work in is the Frontotemporal Disorders Unit. And so we can think of frontotemporal dementia as this spectrum. And so if you notice the title on this slide, it says frontotemporal lobar degeneration, FTLD. Well, how come sometimes we're saying FTD and now I'm saying FTLD? So what I described to you, the symptoms that I saw in my husband, and what Marilyn's describing, the symptoms, those are what clinicians know how to diagnose the clinical presentation. How does this patient show up? What signs and symptoms are letting us know what condition is this person living with? Frontotemporal lobar degeneration, that's the pathology that's causing the disease. We want you to hear all these terms so that you understand, what are the complexities that families are navigating when they're trying to obtain a diagnosis and understand what's happening with their loved one. And if you can see this spectrum, I promise we won't test you on this particular slide, but you see that it affects motor, right? With ALS, people have FTD and ALS together. Behavior and personality, that's those frontal lobe impacts, the last part of our brain to develop when we're young children, right? Those impulse control and executive functioning and the part of you that makes you, your personality. And then we have, you can see SVPPA. So that's semantic variant primary progressive aphasia. We have NAPPA, non-fluent variant of primary progressive aphasia. The logopenic variant can be caused by Alzheimer's disease. We have cortical basal syndrome and, as Marilyn described, progressive supranuclear palsy. These are on the spectrum of FTD, and they are considered related dementias to Alzheimer's disease. So Alzheimer's disease is the most common reason that a person could be living with dementia, but it's not the only reason. And FTD is the most prevalent reason for someone to live with a young onset dementia. That's any dementia under the age of 65. Okay, next slide. So you might want to learn a little more. I love this issue of the Journal of Aging Life Care. I was able to contribute to an article along with our director, Dr. Brad Dickerson from the Mass General FTD unit, where we really compare what is it like if you're caring for a person with FTD compared with caring for a person with Alzheimer's disease. Many of you may work in programs where you have developed an incredible skill set for working with people living with Alzheimer's disease, a memory-based dementia. And then you meet someone with FTD and you think, oh my gosh, how come all my amazing tricks of the trade are not working? And it's because the disease is impacting the brain in a different way. Next slide. I welcome you to run to Apple Podcasts or Spotify and follow the From Care to Cure podcast. This is a podcast where I'm the host. It's produced by our incredible producer, Amy Almeida. And you can learn more about FTD. We have a conversation this whole season with Dr. Brad Dickerson, our director. How is FTD diagnosed? How can we care for it? What are our hopes for the future of treatment? Next slide. Okay, so we've talked about the patient, but today you're hearing from two FTD caregivers. Next slide. When you diagnose a person with Alzheimer's, FTD, or related dementia, you are handing out two diagnoses, one of patient and one of caregiver. Next slide. Unfortunately, what we know is that caregivers of loved ones living with dementia experience a threat to their physical, emotional, and even financial well-being. We have data to support that family caregivers of loved ones with dementia have higher rates of depression, anxiety, substance abuse, heart disease, and chronic diseases related to stress. They can even have higher rates of mortality. And we have to think about how can we inoculate, how can we protect our caregivers when this is a disease that's not even contagious? Why are our caregivers experiencing these challenges? Next slide. I often say because many of the caregivers that I meet with and myself have often felt this way. This is what a caregiver mind might look like. I actually made this slide based off of actual things that I did as a caregiver. And, I really wanted you to see that red box at the top that says crisis response, because maybe I had a day set up where I thought, okay, I'm going to meet with an attorney. I'm going to work on this paperwork for Medicare. I'm going to plan a healthy dinner. And then someone takes a fall, right? Someone's acting a little bit delirious, maybe has a UTI, and suddenly you're off to the emergency department. You're off to the doctors. So caregivers are often juggling so many things that need attention and care and work and planning. And then they're also providing that acute care in the moment. Acute care in the moment might be helping your loved one in the bathroom, preparing a meal and helping your loved one eat it safely. But it could also be, tending to your loved one's very important medical needs. And if you look here at this, very, very busy slide, which is meant to be busy, meant to be overwhelming, you don't even see things listed for the caregiver themselves. The caregiver's well visits, the caregiver's time to have respite and breaks with friends. So we need to think about how can we do a better job in this arena. Next slide. The cost of family caregiving. This is something that I think is very important to talk about. We said that being a caregiver for your loved one, while it can be an incredible act of love and joy and connection, it also can be very expensive and challenging. We know that 12 million Americans provide unpaid care for a family member, friend living with all types of dementias. The value of this per year, it's more than $413 billion worth of care. That's with a B. And what we know is that the social and economic burden of FTD, it's actually exacerbated for young families. And in a 2017 study published in the Journal of Neurology, we saw that the annual cost of FTD can actually be double that of a typical Alzheimer's. Why? Well, one of the main reasons is that if you have that typical age Alzheimer's, maybe you get it in your 70s, maybe you and your spouse, you and your partner are retired. But what if you have a diagnosis of FTD and you're 50 years old and your spouse is 50 and you're both at the prime of your careers? Maybe you have young children in the home. And now suddenly that caregiver who's working full time to keep the house afloat, they need to pay someone very early on to help care for their loved one. So we often see earlier costs and bigger costs for care coverage when families are young. And that's one of the specialized needs that we want to bring your attention to. Marilyn, I'd love to turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Katie. Yeah, diagnosis caregiver. I never thought that that would be a diagnosis that I would have. But as Katie said, we've had like these loved ones in our lives and we've loved them and had a relationship with them and we're going to take care of them. So how do we do that, in a way that not only cares for them, but also cares for ourselves? And that is a tightrope walk that I have really had to learn how to walk. Um, Fortunately, I've got two adult children who live here in Boulder, and they come by and they're loving and careful to their dad, and very caregiving to their dad, very supportive. They'll make dinner. They'll get him up and get him in his wheelchair and take him for a ride outside. They'll be, there to emotionally support him and me. Um, and sometimes I feel like, am I asking too much of them? Or, they have their lives as well, but it's their dad and they want to show up. There's some pictures here of our daughter Emma with David one Hanukkah, but they still want to be involved in our holidays. They want to be with David on holidays. And so we try to emotionally show up and support one another and physically, but it is so true that, the physical and financial consequences for caregivers are really kind of, a heavy burden. Moving someone with ALS or PSP around is physically taxing. Um, Spending all that money on equipment to get them moved around. um, Whoever thought, I'd be investigating poles and all kinds of things, lifts. But, that stress, that caregiver mind slide that Katie showed, like that is so true. Like, investigating, like I spend so much time online, like, okay, well, now he's at this stage. What do I need to help me help him? Is it a certain kind of a spoon even? There are just things that come up. And taking care of myself has really been like come to the fore. I've had a couple of anxiety attacks where, I've had to visit a doctor, and unexpected. Like I'm a healthy person, I'm very healthy, but the stress can really get to you. This question about how do we vaccinate our nation's caregivers against a disease that isn't contagious but making them sick is really huge because I think, like a lot of people, I thought, well, you get a diagnosis of a rare disease or a dementia, the government, Medicare, whomever is going to support you. Well, you come to find that a lot of it falls back in your lap. Next slide, please. And then in all of it and throughout all of it, you're dealing with losing the person who you knew for 44 years, who responded in a certain way, who, initiated conversation, who laughed and danced and all of those things that you enjoyed together. And you become a little bit, like in the middle of all of this, feeling this loss that's overwhelming. And pretty soon you recognize that as grief. And it does kind of show up in different ways and at different times. But then it also shows up in this way that has been termed, ambiguous loss. And you kind of, like with PSP or with a lot of dementias, I don't think you know what the timeline is. They say, here are the stages, here's what you can expect, but everybody's different. Everybody responds differently. And so you find yourself wondering, well, should I prepare for something that, I know is coming, but I don't know when? And at the same time, you don't want to get ahead of yourself. So this sense of loss and grief kind of comes up when maybe you're in the middle of trying to plan for, you know, going to visit a friend, or, because you're not going to have that same kind of relationship or experience with that visit that you used to have. You're going to need to wheel your husband around, and, he's not going to speak at the dinner. There's just things that come up that make you kind of feel, that ping that of sadness. So what I've found is that, you know, people who really listen to me, whether that's a family member or a friend, just let me kind of express myself. That helps me so much. That really helps me to get through those moments. So this book and this person, Pauline Boss, actually put a name and some parameters around what I was feeling, and I highly recommend it to anyone who's with a loved one who has dementia. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we've had to really understand is specialized care for a person with FTD, and that is a whole thing unto itself. Next slide, please. But having a medical community, having the support of loved ones and friends, having the support of community resources, that has been a big, big help along the way. So while we don't yet have a cure for dementia, we do have a cure for the isolation and loneliness that comes along with the diagnosis. Next slide, please. And I'm going to turn it back over to Katie.
Marilyn, thank you. And I think talking more about grief, that really is a critical part of supporting families impacted by all types of dementia. So Marilyn and I have shared with you the lived experience of FTD. We've talked about caring for the caregiver. Now we want to give you a framework that you can use to think about, what does an interdisciplinary approach to care look like? And if you look at this model, what's at the top of it? The person living with the diagnosis and their care partner. Care partner can be used liberally, right? For some people with a diagnosis, it's one person. For other people, they have a huge family or a huge network of friends. So you want to think about personalizing it. But the three pillars that we're going to focus on for this interdisciplinary approach to care are the medical community, the home community, and the patient advocacy community. Next slide. So step one, you heard Marilyn and I talk about, boy, how difficult was it to receive that accurate diagnosis? But this is absolutely critical, because if you don't know what's causing your, neurocognitive changes, if you don't know what's causing your personality or behavior challenges, then you don't know what the right treatment might be. You don't know what research options exist. So the first thing that you need to do is keep going until you have an accurate diagnosis. Then you'll find out, okay, what treatment or research might be available for me. The next step is critically important. We encourage all families to think about how can they connect every clinician and healthcare provider that they're working with. Well, who might be on this team? This could be a primary care physician, a neurologist, a speech pathologist, a physical therapist, a dentist, a mental health provider. And keep in mind, whatever medical condition the person with the diagnosis of FTD was living with before, so let's say they had diabetes or cancer or were living with cardiac issues, they still have those issues now. And so we need to make sure that all the team members are connected. Next slide. And remembering that in the medical community, you often have different frequency with which you're interacting with these, specialized or, general care providers. And why does this matter? Well, the family caregiver is someone who's seeing the person every single day. Maybe they're going to weekly or bi-weekly occupational therapy or speech pathology, speech language therapy. And this could be very relevant when they have a quarterly or an annual appointment with another doctor. So we encourage families, let's say you have a specialist appointment coming up. You haven't seen your neurologist in 6 or 12 months, but every single week, they've been seeing a speech pathologist. Every quarter, they've seen the primary care physician. The family caregiver is going to have insights. So we'll say to family caregivers, take a little bit of time, reach out to those other providers and say, do you have questions that we should ask the specialist who's helping us cope with the FTD diagnosis? And you want everyone to be connected, and you want to establish who is the main clinician who's making primary decisions around medication, maybe hospitalization, referrals to hospice, things like that, so that we can try to have a coordinated effort, because it's not just one person or one agency that's going to provide the care, but every person living with FTD is going to need a whole village of support. Next slide. And speaking of the village, the home community is the second pillar, because we know that all care doesn't happen in the clinic. You go to your doctor's appointment, but then you go home to live your life. So after people receive an accurate diagnosis, the very first thing that we encourage them to do is to connect with an elder law attorney. And I'll have a little bit more about that in a coming slide. But we want people as early as possible to make legal and financial plans so that they can participate. One of the things that is so insidious about FTD, Alzheimer's, and related conditions is that they are progressive neurological disorders. That means they get worse over time. So that for a person to protect their personhood and dignity at every stage, they need to voice as much as possible in the early stages about what their wishes are for their plans for the future. Local resources are critical. This can be everything from, hey, where's the grocery store where the staff is really friendly to a person who might have dementia, to where's my adult day health program? Where's the memory care? Where's the respite program? Where's the hospice? And love and support. We encourage caregivers and persons with a diagnosis, as soon as you are able, talk with your family and friends about this new diagnosis and how it's impacting your life. Really let people wrap their arms around you and give that support in all the ways they are able. I tell caregivers, keep a list on your phone of things that you need help with. Some of them might be related to caregiving, like coming over and helping your loved one get ready for their day. But maybe it's things like, wow, if I had someone shovel my driveway during a snowstorm, it would help so much. Or, boy, I would really love it if somebody dropped off dinner at my house the first Sunday of every month. And if you have that list ready, when someone says, if you need anything, let me know, you could say, well, actually, I have a list right here. People want to help, but oftentimes they don't know how. Give them the answer. Don't make them search for it. Next slide. Okay, so take a snapshot of this slide. And if you're working with a family living with dementia, they need to speak with a certified elder law attorney. These are the best attorneys to help people living with a diagnosis of Alzheimer's, FTD, and related dementias. And I put the national website there. The National Institute on Aging is an incredible resource for families to go and figure out, gee, what is even the type of future care planning that I might need? What are the types of conversations that I might need to have with my lawyer or my financial planner to get ready for the future? Help people think ahead of time. Who's going to be your healthcare decision maker? Who's going to make decisions about your money? What are even your options? All of this comes with being brave and starting the conversation. And just remember, you don't have to have all the answers right away. You just have to start talking to each other. Okay, next slide. And then remembering home community local resources. These can include things like life care managers. These are people that can help families build care plans from the ground up. They can help them at every stage of life lived alongside dementia. Adult day health programs, these are incredible. And if anyone watching this webinar is a staff person in an adult day health program, I want to say thank you to you because you often provide the ability for families, for persons living with a diagnosis to stay in their homes longer, for caregivers to go out and stay working, and for people to feel more connected and less isolated. Home care, thank you to all of you. If you are working in people's homes, helping them feel loved and cared for while they're safe, thank you so much for doing that. Next slide. Marilyn, I'd love to turn it over to you. Oh, actually, too early. Oh, one minute. So Marilyn has a lot to say about this. But just because dementia has come into your life doesn't mean the joy has to go out. Next slide. Here are some beautiful pictures of Mike and Noah and I being a family. And each one of these photos was taken at the skilled nursing facility where Mike lived during the last 2 years of his life. Each photo was taken by a staff person in the facility. And what I know for sure is that the support we received from that staff allowed us to focus on being a family. So, for the family caregivers out there that are worried about engaging with those services and supports, know that sometimes it can be the best avenue for you to focus more on the role that only you can play, which is that of wife or partner or sibling or cousin, and let other people help you with the caregiving from time to time. Okay, now, Marilyn, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you, Katie. And I'd just like to second what Katie said about caregivers. I never thought that there would be people in the world who would want to come in and care for David as much as I care for him. And I feel the heart and soul of the caregivers who we have occasionally who come in to support us. I see how much you care about people, and I see how much it matters to David to have that kind of experience. So I just wanted to interject that I am so grateful for people who care about other people in this condition in the world. So here's some recent pictures, some happy family pictures that I just wanted to make the point that yes, the joy has not gone out of being together, and there are times when, you can see on David's face, even in the bottom right picture, a little smile, which he doesn't do that often. So, yeah. So please know too that life happens in the middle of all of these diagnoses in a way that can be also very uplifting. So next slide, please. But I do want to say that in my experience, I've learned that if we can advocate for ourselves, we need to do it because there are families like ours who enter into this situation and this condition with no knowledge, no preparation, no support, no idea of what it will entail Katie's given some wonderful resources that really everybody should follow, but it is an educational process as you go along. Like even from year to year, we've been on this journey now for 5 solid years, and we're still learning things. There's resources like the agencies and the organizations. For us, Cure PSP, all AFTD. There are just some, the Alzheimer's Association, even our local area council on aging has been a wonderful resource for us for local resources. So, and then this past year, I was able to attend the AFTD conference because it came to Denver. So I learned so much at that conference, and it allows me to then step up and write to my congressman. I've written, like, I think Senator Bennett's probably tired of hearing from me, but I write letters like constantly, with updates and what I need and what I think, they should be really looking at in terms of funding for our country. And I do that because I see that we can do this. This is something that we could really like make a difference in a lot of people's lives. So education, connection. I also joined the FTD registry. David and I are members of the online FTD registry, which is a really interesting registry. They send me questionnaires almost every week, but it's kind of good because then they also send you information about clinical trials and opportunities for research that you can get involved in. They explain things like brain donation. There's just so many like opportunities to learn when you get connected to these wonderful resources and these wonderful organizations. So please, I recommend if you're working with any families to, share that information, share this information that you've gotten today. And then advocacy opportunities with AFTD, I know in particular because of my role on the engagement board that there are opportunities to join an advocacy group, and then as a group kind of send emails and letters to support funding for research and for other needs that people living with dementia have. AARP for seniors is also another really good resource, believe it or not. They do a lot of good things. And then community fundraisers. We joined the AFTD, I guess it was a 5K we pushed David around, for a couple Ks. And it was so much fun. It was like just a way for us to feel like the love and support of community. So there's lots of events and fundraisers that we can get involved in and that we have gotten involved in. So I highly recommend that as well. Next slide, please. Katie, do you want to talk about AFTD?
I think it's just a wonderful, grab this slide. Everything that Marilyn just mentioned, families with FTD can access through www.theaftd.org. And they have a helpline, an email address. You can scan here to sign up for newsletters. It's awesome.
Thank you, Katie. It really is awesome. And then next slide, please. The wonderful thing about, AFTD is they're involved with the All FTD study, which Katie mentioned. This is how we got to know one another, but David and I are, I'm a study partner and David's a research participant in this long-term NIH-funded study, which has been collecting information across the country, as you can see from this slide. And I believe that actually, the funding might even be coming up again for refunding. So if you want to get involved in advocacy, now's a good time. And I want to say that just the idea of going in and doing research and knowing that we're contributing to, tomorrow's cure, while that doesn't maybe help us today, it does make us feel like we are part of something bigger, that we are contributing to the improvement of our community and our society. So this study is amazing, and the results that have been coming out of it have really, the hope is create some new clinical trials and new drugs that might help people. Next slide, please. So this idea of giving voice to the lived experience. This is the board that I'm involved with, and Katie is the director of. And the people on the board are representative from around the country. And there are people with FTD, there are caregivers, there are family members of people with young onset FTD. It's an amazingly diverse group of people, young, old, people have been doing this for a long time, shorter amount of time. But everyone who's involved with it shares their information in a way that actually helps to contribute to how the study is shaped in the future, which for me is like an amazing opportunity that we could be doing this together to create, an improved uh, vehicle for information, like the newsletter that comes out of AFTD and the registry have all like benefited from our information. So anyway, I just want to praise this study, and in particular this engagement board that I've been a part of. Next slide, please. So I'm going to turn it back over to Katie now.
Thank you, Marilyn. Okay, so this is it. This is the summary. What's the takeaway? When you're thinking about your families with FTD, think about how they can identify what is their diagnosis. How can they connect with other members of their team? How can they protect themselves today and their future by talking about legal, financial, and goals of care? How can they engage with local service providers and their community? And then, oops, next slide, please. So in summary, we hope that you understand a little bit more about what FTD is like, so that if someone with FTD walks through the door of your adult day health program or ends up on your list of people that you're visiting as a home care provider, or maybe asks for an evaluation at your skilled nursing facility, that you'll know a little bit more about what this experience is like for families, that you understand why every member of an interdisciplinary care team is important, how we want to have person-centered care that includes caring for the caregiver, and that engagement with advocacy with community-based organizations, it helps people feel empowered and gives them that opportunity for hope and joy. Next slide. Thank you all for your time and attention today. Your knowledge and compassion helps families live with dignity and personhood at every stage. And Marilyn, you can close us out.
Yeah. Next slide, please. So this is dedicated to people living with a diagnosis, their care partners, and families impacted by FTD. Thank you, thank you, thank you for everything you do to make our lives better. And thank you.
Thank you both. A very exceptional presentation. Lots of kudos are coming to you through our question and answer pod. I just want to remind people you can put your questions in there. And if you want to learn more about our program, the National Alzheimer's and Dementia Resource Center, you can email us at our webinar address. We could be happy to help you. If you want to learn more about ACL's funding opportunities in this area, you can look at grants.gov. For now, we're going to go to the questions. And I talked with the presenters about this before we started, that oftentimes I see a theme in the questions, and today the theme is diagnosis. And it's coming up a lot in these questions. But I want to address the questions that came up from a few people who are trying to understand how to move through various misdiagnoses that their loved one may receive, or a person that they're working with may receive. And then how do you know when you have the right diagnosis? That's come up quite a few times. So why don't we start with those two questions?
Yeah, so I think what I can do is just speak at first about how do you know you have the right diagnoses. We want to be honest that when you're living with a young onset or an atypical dementia, it can be very difficult to obtain that accurate diagnosis. And sometimes the way you get it is you get diagnosed with something that's not the right thing. And as your clinicians follow you over time, they say, huh, this diagnosis isn't progressing the way we thought it should. I think, Marilyn, you had that experience. Yeah. Yes. So one of the ways, let's say a family member says, gosh, my loved one seems to be different. They have behavior, personality changes, motor challenges, maybe memory issues, and you bring them to the doctor. I think what's important is to think about what are all the ways that we're able to gather information to come to a diagnosis. You want to think of your clinician as like a detective. The very first way is you coming to the appointment with these concerns, documenting them, making notes, presenting them. And then that doctor might do a quick cognitive, like paper and pencil test in the office. They might write a referral for a scan of the brain. They might order blood work or a spinal tap. But they need to put all of that information together and sometimes watch a person over a period of time to be, sure about that diagnosis. Is that helpful?
I think so. I think that another question that came out of this is, and it sounds like there's no one answer to what to like if it's an MRI or a blood draw or some other type of test that can give the accurate diagnosis. You were talking about you need to see how things progress over time, but can you talk a little bit about various tests that may be performed so people are understanding what they may experience or what those who they're caring for may experience?
Yes. So, Marilyn, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I'll talk a little bit about our experience. The first test that David got was an MRI, and unfortunately, it was inconclusive. And so, therefore, that led to a referral and a second referral. And at that point, it became more of a neuropsychological testing to see, if they could pinpoint it. But it is this process that Katie is talking about, and then they start to put the pieces together as over time of. For David, it was the speech and the falls, and and then some of the twitches and movement issues. So I know that, like, I think that there are perhaps in the future ways that they will be doing blood tests, but a blood test really wasn't going to be able to diagnose what David had. The spinal tap he did have was to rule out something. It wasn't to rule it in, you know what I mean? So yeah, so I agree with Katie that it really is this kind of progress over time, but getting to the right people, I do think is super important. Like getting the right team, getting the right referrals, stepping up and asking for those referrals. Go ahead,
Great, thank you.
Katie.
Katie, do you want to add to that?
Yeah. So, Sarah, I see people are asking, like, who's the best person?
Yes, that was my next question. Who's the best person?
Yeah, so it's great if you live in a part of the country where you have an FTD specialist, right? You have a doctor who's a specialist in Alzheimer's disease. But what if you live in a part of the country where you don't have that? Primary care physicians are often the first line of defense when people come in and are experiencing these challenges. So it's Marilyn said, like, keep asking for more support. We've heard that now there are FDA approved blood tests for Alzheimer's disease, and those have a long way to go. But thinking about there's also the very first FDA approved treatment for Alzheimer's disease. Why am I mentioning blood tests and treatments for Alzheimer's disease at an FTD presentation? Because you want to make sure, what is causing my cognitive personality behavioral changes? Is it Alzheimer's? Is it FTD? If it's Alzheimer's disease, then maybe the right path for me is this, certain set of treatments. But as Marilyn, shared, when her husband had a test to look for Alzheimer's in his body, he didn't have it. So then that helps them rule it out. Sometimes you're ruling things out. But I think more than ever, it's important to speak up if you think that something is wrong. Because one thing that's going to be true across the board is that the earlier you have a diagnosis, the more likely treatments are going to make a positive impact on your life.
Great, thank you. I thought we were going to be able to get to one more question, but I think we're going to need to close out because I want to just remind people, I'm getting a lot of questions about will we get the slides. Anyone who participated will be sent the slides and the recording from today's presentation. Those materials are ready for you, so sit tight for those. At this point, I want to close us out by giving a deep thank you to Katie and Marilyn for your excellent presentations today and for taking the time to not only present with us, but also prepare such a beautiful presentation with such a personal touch to it with your experiences and being able to highlight that for everyone. I want to let everyone know that we are having another webinar in 2 weeks on August 25th. It is about dementia respite programs and translating a faith-based model called Respite for All into community-based environments. We will be meeting, as I mentioned, on August 25th at 3 p.m. Eastern. You should have received registration details about that. If you didn't and you would like the information, please send an email to nadrc-webinars@rti.org. And for now, we're going to say goodbye, and we hope to see you all again. Thank you again to our presenters and to all of you who participated with us today. Have a great afternoon, everyone.